My name is Charlotte Wynne, and I was 29 years old when all of this happened. Back then, my life looked quiet from the outside, maybe even too quiet to people who never bothered to understand me. I wasn't the kind of person who filled rooms with noise or poured my life onto social media. I preferred soft spaces, predictable mornings, and the kind of silence that feels like breathing room, not loneliness. I lived alone in a small apartment just 15 minutes from my mother's house. She was the one person who never interpreted my quiet nature as emptiness. To her, I wasn't reserved or distant. I was simply me, and that was enough. Every Sunday, I would bring her flowers, usually lilies, and we'd sit together, her talking more than me, both of us comfortable in the balance we naturally created. She always said I was her calm in a world full of loud, hungry personalities. Unfortunately, one of those loud personalities was her sister, my Aunt Marlene. Marlene had a way of entering a room like she was stepping onto a stage. Every conversation was a competition, every small detail an opportunity to flaunt something: her expensive bag, her daughter's engagement ring, her own achievements. Even her misfortunes carried a kind of rehearsed drama. To her, silence wasn't peace, it was weakness, and independence wasn't strength, it was failure. For years, she made it clear that my life didn't meet her standards. I never challenged her, I never corrected her, I simply learned to navigate around her presence, the way people sidestep a puddle on the street. Noticeable, mildly irritating, but not worth stepping into. Everything shifted the morning my mother fell ill. One phone call, short, trembling, urgent, pulled me out of my comfortable routines and straight into a hospital hallway that smelled of antiseptic and fear. I didn't know it yet, but walking into that building meant walking into a moment that would quietly rewrite everything I believed about myself and everything my aunt thought she knew about me. The hospital felt colder than it should have, not the kind of physical cold you escape with a jacket, but the heavy, sinking cold that settles in your chest when fluorescent lights replace daylight and the air tastes faintly of antiseptic. I checked in with the nurse, my voice steady but thin, and followed her to my mother's room. The moment I stepped inside, I felt my throat tighten. Seeing her lying there, still, pale, surrounded by wires and soft beeping, made the room blur around the edges. I pulled a chair close to her bedside and held her hand, whispering something she couldn't hear, but I needed to say anyway. It didn't take long for the door to swing open. My Aunt Marlene breezed in like the hospital was just another stage for her to perform on. Her heels clicked loudly, unnecessarily, as if she wanted every nurse to turn and acknowledge her presence. She adjusted her designer coat, glancing around with a look that mixed disapproval and curiosity. Then her eyes landed on me. "Oh, Charlotte," she said, dragging out my name as though she'd just discovered something out of place. "You look tired." A pause, a smile. "You really should take better care of yourself, dear. You never know who's watching." She didn't sit. She circled the room slowly, her gaze lingering on my simple sweater, my unstyled hair, even the way I sat, shoulders forward, fingers laced tightly together. Every small observation became a silent judgment. "You came alone?" she asked, though the answer was obvious. Her tone wasn't curiosity, it was confirmation of a conclusion she'd carried for years. That's the thing about living such an isolated life. No one to lean on in moments like this. It must be difficult. I didn't respond. I kept my focus on my mother's hand, the steady pulse beneath her skin anchoring me against Marlene's theatrics. But she wasn't finished. She stepped closer, lowered her voice dramatically, and said, "Honestly, Charlotte, at your age, being this alone is almost tragic." That was the moment something shifted. Not in my voice, not in my posture, but somewhere deeper. It happened more quickly than I expected, and far more publicly than necessary. A nurse entered the room to check my mother's vitals, a young woman with gentle eyes and a clipboard hugged to her chest. Behind her, two visitors walked past the open door, speaking softly to each other. The hallway, once quiet, suddenly felt exposed. And that was precisely when my Aunt Marlene chose to escalate. She stood near the foot of the bed, arms crossed, chin lifted in superiority. "You know," she began loudly enough for anyone walking by to hear, "I sometimes wonder if Charlotte even tries to meet anyone." The nurse shifted uncomfortably but kept working. I kept my eyes on my mother, focusing on the rhythmic rise and fall of her chest. Marlene continued, "Most women her age would be worried. At 30, your options get limited." She laughed lightly, a rehearsed little trill that echoed in the small room. "Honestly, I wouldn't blame a man for walking away. She barely even speaks. It must be exhausting trying to date someone who lives like a ghost." The words weren't new. She'd said versions of them before, usually at family gatherings, usually after a couple glasses of wine. But saying them here, inside a hospital room, beside her unconscious sister, felt like a new low, even for her. She wasn't talking to me, she was performing. The nurse gave me a small, sympathetic glance, but I didn't meet her eyes. I didn't want pity. I didn't want comfort. I just wanted silence, something Marlene had never learned to give. But my aunt had more to say. "She's always been like this," she told the nurse, as if invited into conversation. "Too quiet, too plain, too unavailable. No wonder she's alone. Men want someone engaging, not someone who disappears into the background." The nurse pressed her lips together, clearly uncomfortable. Two visitors slowed near the door, pretending to check a sign on the wall, but listening. Marlene noticed the audience and brightened. "Oh, you should have seen her at my daughter's engagement party," she laughed again, standing there by herself like a coat rack. Not one person approached her, not one. Her laughter spilled out into the hallway, sharp and unkind. I didn't move. I didn't look up. I didn't defend myself. Not because she was right, but because I was tired. Tired in a way that lived deep in my bones. Tired of explaining myself. Tired of being misunderstood. Tired of letting her voice shape my reflection. And for a brief, painful moment, a thought flickered. What if she's not entirely wrong? That quiet doubt settled into my chest, marking the beginning of an internal unraveling I couldn't ignore. When the nurse finally left and the hallway quieted again, the room seemed to grow heavier. My aunt had stepped outside to take a phone call, leaving only the faint hum of machines and my mother's steady breathing to fill the silence. For a moment, I let myself sink into the chair. I'd spent most of my life believing I was immune to comments like Marlene's, that their sharp edges dulled with repetition. But sitting there, my mother unconscious beside me, I felt every word she'd ever thrown in my direction, gathering like dust on the shelves of my memory. It wasn't just today's humiliation, it was years of subtle dismissals. The way relatives would say, "Charlotte doesn't mind being alone, she's used to it," as if they were excusing a flaw rather than acknowledging a choice. The way coworkers assumed I had endless free time because surely someone like me didn't have plans. The way family friends would ask, "Still single?" with a sympathetic smile that hid quiet judgment. Each moment was small, forgettable, not worth confronting, but together they built something heavier than I ever admitted. I watched my mother's chest rise and fall, and I wondered when exactly I started believing the narratives people crafted for me. When did I start shrinking myself just to avoid conversations? When did I stop correcting people who misunderstood my silence? When did independence become something I had to justify? I pressed my palm lightly over my mother's hand, grounding myself in the warmth of her skin. She would never speak to me the way her sister did. She would never measure my worth by noise or attention. But she wasn't awake to counter Marlene's voice, so it echoed louder. A quiet ache formed at the center of my chest. Not pain, not anger, just the kind of deep loneliness that comes from feeling unseen. And for a moment, I wondered, had I done this to myself? By staying quiet? By choosing peace over presence? By letting others define me because speaking up felt exhausting? Had I allowed this version of me to spread like a rumor I never corrected? The realization settled in slowly, uncomfortably. I wasn't powerless. I was passive, and that was something I could change. I sat up a little straighter, my fingers tightening around my mother's hand. A small, quiet shift moved through me, not a spark of anger, but a clarity I hadn't felt before. I didn't need to fight Marlene. I didn't need to argue or defend or justify. I just needed to stop absorbing what was never mine to carry. When Marlene returned, her heels clicking back into the room, I didn't stand, I didn't shrink, I didn't brace myself the way I usually did. Instead, I simply observed. Something inside me had shifted, quietly, almost imperceptibly, but unmistakably. The sting from her earlier words had dulled, not because they were any kinder in hindsight, but because I suddenly felt detached from them. They no longer belonged to me. They belonged to her worldview, to her insecurities, to the narrow lens through which she viewed everyone who didn't mirror her. She spoke again, more softly this time, still laced with condescension. "You know, Charlotte, if you tried a little harder—" I didn't listen to the rest, not out of disrespect, but out of clarity. Her voice felt distant, like a radio playing in another room. I watched her as one might watch a stranger on a bus, familiar human movements, but no personal connection. She adjusted her jewelry, smoothed her coat, looked at her reflection in the dark TV screen. Everything about her was curated, controlled, and carefully displayed. And suddenly I realized she had crafted a story about my life without ever being part of it. She didn't know where I spent my weekends. She didn't know who I spent my evenings with. She didn't know that the reason I didn't post pictures wasn't because I lacked a life, but because I valued privacy more than performance. She didn't know about him, about the quiet, steady presence who had become my home, about the man who held me the way people hold fragile things, with certainty, not caution, about the person I had chosen not to parade in front of relatives who turned relationships into trophies. She didn't know, and she had never asked. For years, her assumptions had shaped the narrative everyone around us believed, and I had allowed it, not because she was right, but because correcting her felt like shouting into the wind. But now, sitting beside my mother, feeling her warmth, watching Marlene fuss around the room, I realized I didn't need her validation. I didn't even need her understanding. I simply needed distance from her expectations, her noise, her imagined version of me. A calmness settled around my shoulders, like a soft shawl. Not victory, not defiance, just peace. I looked at her, not challengingly, not submissively, just looking. For the first time in years, I really saw her. Not the intimidating aunt of my childhood, not the judgmental voice in the family, but a woman who needed to feel superior in order to feel secure. Her words didn't wound me anymore, because they were never meant for me. They were meant for the reflection she feared becoming. I turned my attention back to my mother. Her breathing was slow, steady, almost rhythmic. I brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, letting the room fall into a quiet I finally felt at home in. Then, softly, my phone vibrated. A single message lit up the screen. "I'm here. Where should I go?" My husband had arrived, and for the first time that day, a small, knowing calm spread through me. Not to prove anything, not to silence anyone, but because truth was finally stepping into the room. I slipped my phone into my pocket without reacting, without shifting, without giving anything away. Marlene was rambling about something, her daughter's upcoming anniversary party or a luncheon she was organizing. I wasn't really listening. Her voice floated around the room in practiced crescents, each sentence carefully designed to sound impressive to anyone who might overhear. But the air in the room felt different now, quieter somehow, steadier, because he was here. My husband had always carried a kind of natural calm that didn't demand attention, but somehow drew it anyway. Even before I saw him, I felt the energy shift, the way people do when a door opens behind them. A soft knock tapped against the slightly open door before it eased wider. He stepped inside with the same quiet confidence I had fallen in love with, shoulders relaxed, expression gentle, eyes immediately searching for me rather than assessing who else was present. He didn't hurry. He simply walked with purpose, as if the only thing that mattered in that moment was reaching my side. The nurse, who had checked on my mother earlier, passed him in the hallway, did a double take, and nodded respectfully. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice noticeably warmer. He gave her a small smile in return. "Good afternoon." Another nurse, further down the hallway, paused as well, lifting her hand slightly in acknowledgement. There was a familiarity in the way they greeted him, not surprise, not curiosity, recognition. Marlene noticed. She glanced toward the door, expecting, perhaps, another visitor for a different patient. When her eyes landed on him, her demeanor shifted subtly but unmistakably. Her shoulders straightened, and for the first time that day, she fell silent. He crossed the room in a few long, fluid steps. When he reached me, he placed a warm hand on my shoulder and leaned down just enough to ask, softly, "How's she doing?" His voice was calm, deep, steady, the opposite of the frantic tension Marlene brought with her. I exhaled slowly, some of the weight in my chest easing. "She's stable," I murmured, still resting. He nodded, his hand lingering for a moment as if anchoring me silently. Only then did he turn toward my aunt, offering a polite, courteous smile. "Good afternoon," he said. "I don't think we've formally met." Marlene blinked twice. Hello," she stammered, her earlier confidence dissolving into something unfamiliar, uncertainty. She took a small step forward, smoothing her blouse. "I didn't realize Charlotte was expecting anyone." He didn't flinch. He didn't glance at me for help. Instead, he simply extended his hand with quiet assurance. "I'm Evan, her husband." The word husband landed with a weight that absorbed every ounce of oxygen Marlene had been using to power her commentary. Her lips parted, then closed again. Her eyes darted toward me, searching for confirmation that the man standing inches away, someone who carried himself with calm authority, was truly connected to the niece she had spent the morning belittling. I didn't offer her an explanation. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I didn't justify the truth. I just looked back at her, steady and composed. The tension in the room thickened, not hostile, but charged, not dramatic, but undeniably shifting. Marlene forced a laugh, thin, shaky, nothing like the performative giggles from earlier. "Oh," she said, her voice failing to find its footing. "How lovely to meet you." Evan smiled politely, but his attention was already drifting back to my mother, to the beeping monitors, to the gravity of the moment. He wasn't here to impress her. He wasn't here to contradict her. He was simply here as he always was, with that quiet, grounding presence that spoke louder than any argument could. In the doorway behind him, two nurses exchanged knowing glances. Recognition, respect, and Marlene noticed that too. Her eyes widened slightly, trying to piece together what she had walked into, how much she had misread, how wrong her assumptions had been, and how publicly her narrative was beginning to unravel. That was when she finally saw him fully, tall, composed, entirely unbothered by her presence. And in that instant, she realized she was no longer the most commanding figure in the room. If there was one thing Marlene prided herself on, it was reading people quickly, or at least believing she did. So when Evan first appeared at the doorway, tall and calm and carrying himself with the ease of someone used to moving through serious spaces, she had made an assumption, a flattering one for herself. She straightened her posture and smoothed her blouse, convinced he must be a doctor heading toward the room. Her expression shifted into one of pleasant anticipation, the kind she reserved for people she thought were important. For a moment, she even touched her hair, adjusting it the way she did when she expected to be noticed. But Evan didn't look at her. He didn't hesitate. He didn't pause to examine the chart clipped to the end of the bed or ask about the patient as a doctor would. Instead, he walked directly, unquestionably, to me. It was the clarity of his movement that shattered her assumption. Her face flickered with confusion, then curiosity, then something more fragile, something close to disbelief. He touched my shoulder gently, grounding me in a way that felt both protective and natural. When he spoke quietly to me, Marlene's eyes widened even further, as if every word challenged the version of reality she had been presenting just moments earlier. I felt her stare, but I didn't look at her, not out of avoidance, simply because I didn't need to. I turned slightly toward her and said in a soft voice that carried no triumph, no sharp edges, no theatrics, "Aunt Marlene, this is my husband, Evan." Just that. Nothing more, nothing explained or emphasized. Evan offered her a polite nod. "It's very nice to meet you," he said, his tone steady and sincere. She cleared her throat softly. "So, Charlotte," she began, her voice too gentle, too careful. "You should have told us you were married." Her words lingered, waiting for me to fill the silence, to help her regain balance. I didn't. Not out of spite, but because I didn't owe her an explanation. Not after everything she had said loudly, confidently, in front of strangers. She rushed to fill the void. "I mean, of course you don't have to share everything with the family. Everyone has private lives. I didn't know." I still said nothing. Her shoulders tightened. She tried again, reaching for small talk like a lifeline. "Evan seems very polite," she said cautiously, "and, well, respected here, apparently. The staff clearly knows him. That's impressive." Her voice wavered on the last word. I nodded once, acknowledging her comment without encouraging more. The silence that followed wasn't cruel. It wasn't tense. It simply existed, the way silence does when truth has rearranged the balance in the room. She looked away first. Her eyes roamed the monitors, the tiled floor, the blanket on my mother's bed, anywhere but at me. Her earlier dominance had dissolved into something unfamiliar on her, humility, or perhaps the beginnings of it. She stayed quiet after that, and in that quiet, something subtle shifted between us. Not a reconciliation, not forgiveness, but a recognition, a silent acknowledgement that her words had never shaped my reality, only her assumptions. Minutes passed like that, still and undisturbed. Then my mother's hand twitched beneath mine. I straightened instantly, leaning forward as her eyelids fluttered with the slow, trembling effort of someone waking through layers of medication and exhaustion. Her breathing changed, deepened. Her eyebrows drew together slightly, as if gathering strength. Marlene inhaled sharply. "Oh, she's waking up!" And just like that, the room shifted again, this time towards something softer, something human, pulling us both out of our own thoughts. My mother's eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, searching the room in small, shaky movements. I leaned closer, brushing her hand with my thumb until her gaze found mine. When recognition settled into her expression, something inside me loosened, like a knot gently untying. "Mom, I'm right here." Her lips curved into the faintest smile, weak but unmistakably warm. She squeezed my hand with what little strength she had. And then her eyes shifted to the doorway, where Evan had just returned after speaking with the doctor. The soft smile deepened. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but full of understanding. She saw him. She saw me. She saw what existed between us without needing a single explanation. Evan stepped to my side, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. My mother's gaze softened even further. There was no surprise in her eyes, just quiet affirmation, as if she had always known the shape my life truly held. Behind us, Marlene hovered awkwardly near the corner of the room. For the first time since she arrived, she didn't demand space. She didn't speak. She didn't position herself at the center of attention. She had become background noise, blurred, muted, irrelevant to the moment unfolding in front of her. My mother blinked slowly, her eyes moving between Evan and me. "You're here," she whispered. "I'm always here," Evan answered gently. And just like that, any remnants of doubt, any lingering fragments of Marlene's words dissolved. My reality existed in the hands I was holding, not in the assumptions others made. As my mother drifted back to rest, I realized something with a clarity I hadn't felt before. People weaponize loneliness only when they fear silence in their own lives. They call independence sad because they don't know how to be alone with themselves, and they label others as lacking because it distracts them from what they lack. My life had never been lonely. It had simply been private, and there was nothing shameful in that. When it was time to leave, Evan stepped out to speak with a nurse. I gathered my bag quietly. Marlene moved toward the door at the same time, but when our eyes met briefly, she looked away almost instantly. Not out of anger, out of discomfort, out of recognition, out of a humility she wasn't used to feeling. She murmured a soft, almost inaudible goodnight without lifting her gaze. I nodded once, calm and steady, and walked past her without looking back. Looking back now, I understand something I couldn't fully grasp in that moment. None of what happened was intentional on my part. I didn't walk into that hospital with a plan to correct anyone's assumptions or expose anyone's cruelty. I didn't orchestrate a dramatic reveal. I didn't craft a strategy. I didn't seek revenge. Truth simply arrived when it needed to. It stepped quietly into the room, just as Evan had, and settled into the empty spaces where lies and assumptions had lived for far too long. And in doing so, it did what confrontation never could. It shifted the entire balance without a single raised voice. My aunt's words no longer echo in my mind the way they used to. Not because they weren't hurtful, but because they were never about me in the first place. Her view of my life was shaped by her own fears, her own insecurities, her own need to stand tallest in every room she entered. I see that now, with a clarity I didn't have before. Silence isn't weakness, privacy isn't emptiness, and independence isn't a flaw waiting to be fixed. Some people need to belittle others to feel tall, but some of us learn that real height, real strength, comes from being grounded, not loud. My mother eventually stabilized, her recovery slow but steady. Evan remained my constant, not because the world needed to see it, but because that's who he has always been. And Marlene? Well, she still circles the family orbit, but her voice doesn't reach me the way it once did. It barely grazes the air around me now. The distance between who I am and who she imagined me to be is wide enough that her words can't cross it anymore. In the end, I didn't win anything, and she didn't lose anything. Life simply unfolded truth in its own time, and sometimes that's all the closure we ever really need.